And Chris, what about the fact that you were approached by a group of lawyers to represent journalists in suing in regard to the NDAA Act?
Well, I mean, this is a catastrophic piece of legislation, bipartisan support. The bill was sponsored by Carl Levin, a Democrat, and John McCain. It allows the military, breaks 200 years of precedent and permits the military to carry out domestic policing in the United States. It allows the executive branch to condemn people, and these terms are very amorphous, suspected of substantially supporting terrorists or associated groups of terrorists or whatever, to be stripped of due process, thrown in a military brig, held in Guantanamo-like conditions until, quote-unquote, the end of hostilities, according to the legislation, whenever that is.
Right.
So, we already had the 2001 Authorization to Use Military Force Act, which was pretty awful. And it was a kind of radical interpretation of that act by John Yoo, a lawyer in the Bush White House, and others, that in the eyes of the Bush administration gave them the right to strip Jose Padilla, an American citizen, of his legal rights, hold him for 3.5 years in a military brig. It was challenged, made its way to the Supreme Court. They turned him over to the civilian courts before the Supreme Court heard the case. The Supreme Court never ruled on those actions, saying that it was moot. It's the 2001 Act that President Obama interpreted as giving him the right to serve as judge, jury, and executioner for Anwar al-Awlaki, the U.S. cleric in Yemen, killed by a drone strike. I mean, this is really frightening, but this bill essentially codifies all this. There's no ambiguity anymore. They can do all of this. The criteria by which people can be investigated in this country is already, almost reached a point of absurdity. If you're missing fingers on your hand, or you have hoard more than 7 days of food in your house, or you have weatherproof ammunition. I mean, that would include most of my relatives in rural Maine, for a start. But it's a very short step to just add some of the obstructionist tactics of the Occupy movement to that list. I think it's revealing that all of the intelligence communities, the FBI, the CIA, the National Intelligence Agency, none of them wanted this bill. The Pentagon didn't want it. Robert Mueller, head of the FBI, actually testified before Congress saying passage of this bill would make the FBI's investigation into terrorism more difficult because, if they give that kind of power to the military, it would be harder to get people to cooperate, and yet it passes anyway. And I think we have to ask why. And I really believe that, the state, which knows things are going to get worse economically,
And it was passed on a holiday weekend. It
was signed on it was signed on the 31st on New Year's Eve. Right.
Yes.
By Obama.
Right.
It goes into effect in March. So we issued a lawsuit in the Southern District of New York, and if we can get it into court, if they'll give us a hearing, the idea is to file an injunction to hold this legislation in abeyance while it's being challenged legally.
John Turley, this is a professor from Georgetown University, wrote about this and said that it actually goes against the First and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution. And if you have something like this that actually goes against these amendments, then what's the use of the Constitution?
Right. I mean, I think the feeling is that there are judges that will rule in our favor, but the Supreme Court has been so stacked with corporate clones that, I think a realistic appraisal of their voting record would say that it's probably going to be difficult for the Supreme Court to rule in our favor, but that doesn't mean we should try or shouldn't try, and certainly at the very least we can help raise public awareness over what's happening.